They called him Silas, brother of the faith, herald of good news, a friend of Paul himself. But he carried something beneath his robe, and it wasn't just scrolls, it was silence. And in that silence lived screams. He had come a long way from Jerusalem, miles of cracked sandals and aching knees, but the longest distance he'd ever traveled was from who he used to be. Once he was a temple guard, and the blood of martyrs stained more than just his memory. Back then he wore righteousness like armor, polished, until it gleamed with self-righteous violence. He arrested the followers of the way, dragged them from homes, watched mothers scream as children were yanked from their arms. It wasn't personal, it was protocol, or so he told himself. Now he walked beside the man he once feared, Paul. Two enemies of the cross, turned brothers under its shadow. Paul spoke boldly of grace, Silas nodded, but inside, he was crumbling. Because you can hide from Roman spears, but not from memories. At night, Silas didn't sleep. He stared into the fire but saw only flames of another kind. Faces in the coals, men he had beaten, women he had silenced. Eyes that pleaded and were ignored. One name returned, over and over, Banias. Banias had been no one special, just a young man with a dangerous conviction. He wouldn't renounce Jesus, so Silas made an example of him, dragged him into the temple courtyard, pinned him down. The last thing Banias ever said was, "I forgive you." Silas hadn't forgotten. Not a word, not a tear, not a drop of blood. They gathered to hear Paul speak, and Silas too. He had a gift, eloquent, bold, persuasive. But every time he opened his mouth, he felt like a thief, stealing air that should belong to someone else. They saw a preacher. He saw a shadow. He'd lay hands on the sick and they'd recover. And yet, in his sleep, he'd wash the same hands over and over. Still red, still shaking, still cursed. Corinth was loud, louder than most cities, but one day, amidst the crowd, he saw her, Miriam, a young woman he'd arrested long ago. There, among the people. She smiled, but her smile melted into blood, and the city roared. He didn't speak of these visions. Who would believe him? He barely believed himself. He stared at the water on the table, trembling, and remembered the pool outside the temple, where the sick once waited for angels. Banias stood before him, eyes full of light, not accusation. He said nothing, just held out his hand. Silas reached for it and awoke. "I don't deserve this. None of us do. That's the point." The next time Silas preached, he told them everything. The temple, the executions, the blood. He didn't weep to manipulate, he wept because it was truth. And when he finished, no one moved, until a woman, old, scarred, walked forward and kissed his hand. He never stopped seeing ghosts, but they no longer screamed. Now they stood behind him, witnesses to grace. Years passed, cities blurred. Eventually he too found chains, not as an enforcer, but as a prisoner. And in that cell, he wrote, "To those who feel unworthy, remember, the Lord calls even murderers sons." When his time came, he didn't flinch. He smiled, because death could no longer accuse him. Grace had spoken first. And if stories like Silas's remind you that no one is beyond redemption, then join us. There are more shadows to confront, more truth to uncover, and more grace to behold. Subscribe for more unforgettable journeys through history's hidden hearts. Like the video, not for the story, but for the souls it might reach.